Hello to everyone who's joining us. We are going to wait a while, just a couple of minutes while everyone joins us here in the room. We've got quite a few people coming today. As people are arriving, I'm going to ask my colleague Becky to share a poll. Becky, if you could put that up on the screen, that would be great. So while you're here in the waiting area with us, if you could have a look at the poll, click on that, and then we can find out about people's range of experience. So it's how much experience do you have of action learning, very experienced, some experience, I've tried it once or twice, and I'm new to action learning. And we're just going to keep that up for a couple of minutes while everyone joins us here in the room. Okay, if you've just arrived, welcome. As you can see, there's a poll on the screen. Thank you to everyone who's answered that so far. If you've just arrived, if you could click on that and let us know what your experience of action learning is. Okay, we've got a few more people arriving, so we're just going to wait another couple of minutes before we get started. Okay, thank you to everyone that's answered the poll. There's a couple more people just arriving now. I think just seen a message in the chat. The poll isn't working for them. Thanks for answering in the chat anyway. That's great. If you need to get in touch with us, that's the best place to do it. If the poll isn't working for you, it might be because you're on an iPad. I know that goes a little bit wonky sometimes. Okay, just going to wait for one more minute as everyone else finishes joining us. And if you are just arriving, thanks for joining us. As you can see, there's a poll on the screen. If you could add in your experience there, that would be great. Just getting a sense of the range of experience of the people that are joining us here today. Okay. I don't want to keep you waiting any longer, so I think we'll draw that to a close there. Becky, if you could end the poll. Thank you. And yep, there is a really good range of experience here. So a lot of people have got some experience and then kind of pretty much split evenly across very experienced people who've tried it once or twice and people who are completely new to action learning. So welcome all of you. Thank you. And there we go. Okay, so before I start, I'm just going to check that everyone's sound is working okay. And if you can see the chat function at the bottom of your screen, I'd be really grateful if you can just put a thumbs up or write okay in there if you can hear the sound. Great, that looks like it's all working okay. So there is, I'm sure, a lot of experience of using Zoom here in the room. I'm not going to go through that. If you haven't done a webinar before, what might be new is there should be a Q&A button down the bottom of your screen. So after the presentation today, we'll have an opportunity to go through any questions that you've got, and you can drop those in the Q&A box at any point during the session. So if you think of anything as it comes up while I'm talking, please feel free to put it in that Q&A box. Similarly, you can wait until the end. So if you can put questions in the Q&A rather than the chat, and then we'll kind of gather those up and work through them at the end. And the other thing to know before we start is that we will be sending you a follow-up email, and that will have a recording of today's webinar. And if you'd like a PDF of the slides, you can email us back and ask for that as well. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen with you and we can get cracking. Okay, so hopefully you're here for the right webinar. And a little bit about myself to start off with. I'm Mel Scaffold. I joined Action Learning Associates as a director in May. And we've also got Sonja Antell here, who is a long-standing director of ALA, and our colleague Becky on IT. And Sonja and I will be doing the Q&A together at the end. So a little bit about my background. I'm an action learning facilitator, coach, and organisational development consultant. And I've got a background of 20 years in the arts and culture sector as a leader and a manager, and where I built facilitation and coaching into my practice. And I've been in a self-facilitating set for about 15 years. And when I joined ALA, I became really fascinated with this question around what is it that makes some sets work really well and stick at it for the long term? And what is it that's specific and really interesting about being in a long-term set? What are the rewards that you get from something as it extends over deep time? And where can it go wrong? What problems come up? And then what have we learned about getting it right? And when I was writing this webinar, I came across, there's an action learning research and practice journal, which some of you might know about. And somebody, Chris Yates, wrote a couple of articles in there reflecting on his own set at 14 years and 25 years since the set's inception. And I came to there was definitely some shared insights and also some differences in what we took away from those long running sets. So I'll be sharing more about that as we go through. How it's going to work today is I'm going to do a short presentation, about 25 minutes, and we'll look at a brief overview of action learning, who my set is, the rewards of being in a long-running set, what challenges we've come up against, and the secrets that we've distilled about keeping it going. Then there'll be a time for a Q&A at the end, and we will start that with a really brief overview of what action learning is, because there is a really wide range of experience of people joining us here today. So what you might know is that there are slightly different approaches to action learning in different places, particularly in different countries. But at its core, the elements are a structured process for reflecting on experience with a group of peers. And that's what the language that we use for that is a set. So that's the terminology that I'll be using today. And it's based on the core techniques of coaching and feedback, where a person shares a challenge and then the group members pose questions to help the person reflect on and gain insight into that challenge. And then at the end, a person chooses a set of actions that they're going to take forward out of that session. And most action learning sets will have a minimum of 6 sessions. And my particular group has had at least 54. So the things that I was interested in was, how did that happen? Why is it important? Why does that matter? And what makes it work? So who we are, who my set is a set of 6 people, including 3 original set members. So we all trained together originally as 6 facilitators. We were trained by Action Learning Associates 15 years ago at our then organisation's in-house programme. And we all facilitated sets across our company and stayed as a self-facilitating set, which meant that we didn't need an independent person to come in and facilitate us. And over that time, we've had a couple of people join for shorter periods. Obviously, 3 of the original set members have left. And then of the current group, I think the most recent member joined about 3 years ago, and we're about to welcome a new set member. In terms of the makeup of the set, we are a group of women aged between our 30s to 70s, and we are home hopping, by which I mean we meet at members' houses. So we meet 4 times a year for about 5 to 6 hours a time. And this question came up for me, are we actually still the same set? Can we say we are a long-running set when we've had members change? So fans of Only Fools and Horses, and I'm aware this is a specific subset of the people in the webinar, might remember the character Trigger. And he was presented with an award for using the same broom for 20 years, although it had 17 new heads and 14 new handles in that time. So is it still the same broom? Is it still the same set? My gut feeling is yes, and I'm interested in, why is that? So for Chris Yates's group, for example, that's been going for 25 years, and it has, I think, 1 surviving original member, but they still refer to it as the same group. And the way that one of the set members talked about it, they said, it's the batons that are handed on to others. You pick up the DNA of those who have gone before. And I love this way of talking about the DNA of a group, what that might be. So the DNA could be the values of the group, its consistent framework, its personality, and the wisdom that's held within that set. So what are the rewards of being in a long-running set that make it different from something that happens over a fixed time frame? For me, one of the most important things is the scope. So it started as very organizationally focused, specific to that company that helped us set it up. And then as the members' employment moved on, the group stayed together and the scope quickly moved beyond those initial organizational objectives. And it broadened to cover pretty much all areas of our work and life, really. It's seen us through births, marriages, deaths, starts and ends of relationships, and it's really all-encompassing. So that feels really different to me from those sets or those experiences that I've had where it's very focused on particular development frame within an organization. Community and trust are 2 really important things that have come out of it, and that for me comes through that sense of continuity. So there's a level of trust that's developed that's really unlike even the longest term friendships, because of the level of vulnerability and risk that's held within that set. So it holds secrets, it holds history, and I can voice ideas there that I actually wouldn't share probably anywhere else. And there's new projects and careers that have been born there and ended there as well. And there's a lifelong context. So I can reference things that have happened over the last 15 years, and that'll have like another layer of meaning even for the newer members of the set. And me management, by which I mean, so as a freelancer and as a senior executive, I haven't had any line management really for about 10 years. And what I've had instead is a place to share all of the things that I would do in a kind of more traditional line management kind of setup. So any problems, challenges that I've experienced in managing staff, in fundraising, in like career goals, organizational development, resolving issues with boards. We talk a lot about boards. That comes up a lot. So all of those things that I would normally look to a kind of management structure for, that's all held within that action learning set and process. And that also relates to professional development. So this learning for life context. And particularly when I'm self-employed, there's the financial element to that, obviously. But even as an employee, I've found that action learning set has really provided, it's been the source of the vast majority of my professional development needs. And then there's things that happen over deep time, this kind of sense of an annual rhythm of a set. So things that really only happen after a few years, and those might be specific to a particular set, but there are definitely seasonal beats, I would say, that you notice around, it might be around gathering around a fire at Christmas, or it might be around being in a particular place, in a particular garden in the summer. My set has Secret Santa. That's a very important part of our annual rituals. But all of this kind of longevity does bring with it a particular set of challenges. And if you've done facilitator training with Action Learning Associates, you'll probably recognize this image here on the screen, which is the challenge support matrix. So if you can see, there's different areas, different combinations of support and challenge, and a high functioning, a well-functioning set, you would expect to have a high level of challenge and a high level of support. So that top right-hand corner of that image. And the risk with a long-running set that I found is that you can end up dropping into that bottom right-hand corner where you have a high level of support, absolutely, but a lower level of challenge, which can feel like coziness. And I think that's a particular risk when you're meeting at set members' houses, for example. So you might be, like lunch, for example, is an important thing for us, having longer social lunches. And getting that balance right between enjoying the company of the people that you're with and maintaining that kind of high challenge, that's definitely been a risk for us. And the flip side of that is that when you are working in that top right-hand corner of high challenge and high support, that can be intimidating for new members. So if you drop into that space really quickly when you start your sessions, and people are very open in what they're sharing, which obviously is kind of ideal, that's what we're looking for, but there are people who are new to that experience, that level of vulnerability and risk, it can be intimidating, and that's definitely something that I've noticed to be aware of. Then we've got solutioneering. This is a word that I came across in Chris Yates's work, and it's as a result of familiarity. I think there are times when we've been less strict about the framework and about the process. So it's where what I would think of as kind of the fabric of the group gets a bit thinner. And this idea of solutioneering is when the group tries to find ways of actually fixing things for people rather than relying on the process of action learning, which is about supporting that individual to find those solutions for themselves. And for us, that looked like becoming overly resilient on advice rounds, which is a technique that you can use in action learning, although very sparsely, very specifically. There was a point when I think we were using it almost every session, which draws away from the presenter's space and airtime and ability to solve their own problems. And I think in Chris Yates's set, they used that happened for them in the feedback rounds. So you'll find those little ways to creep in if you don't keep an eye on it. And then there's beginnings and endings. And I think, again, this is something that's really specific to long-running sets in terms of what happens when people leave, particularly. So we had one set member who was there as part of the set for a long time and then left really suddenly we've got a process for leave taking, which is really important. And I think if somebody doesn't follow that process, it actually left there was a sense of a void that it almost felt like grief when you have a loss that you aren't able to deal with in the right way in terms of that relationship. And then the other thing is with newer set members. So some people, for example, we had one person who joined just for one set and then didn't tell us that they weren't going to come back, and that destabilized the group. It left us a little bit unsure about, was it about us, was it about the set, and took admin time, all that sort of thing. So these beginnings and endings can have more of a destabilizing effect on the set if we're not paying really close attention to getting those right. And then the last thing that I was thinking of as a challenge is this idea of power and ownership. So half of us are trained facilitators and half of the group have joined, and only one of them has had any prior experience of action learning. So there's a question there of who is in charge. And with an action learning set, we don't really want anyone to be in charge if we're all self-facilitating. And it actually came up in our last set, where I personally stepped into a space that I hadn't, or that I'd made an assumption about without checking. And I did get picked up on it by another set member. So even when you've been doing that for years, these little things can, they can creep in, and it's important to keep an eye on that sense of equity and equality in the group. So how do we get it right? So this is not going to be a surprise to anyone who is a trained facilitator, but the process is the absolute bedrock that keeps us stable. It's the thing that we keep coming back to. It holds us as a set. And for us, that's the kind of classic action learning model, where you have a checking in round, a bidding round, presenter airtime, and feedback. And we've added into that intentionally longer check-ins and lunch, because we found it really important to keep that social element boundaried. And that social element for us has developed over time. That's become really important, but it needs to be really clearly contained so that the process, the action learning process, can create a stable structure, foundation for the group to stand on. And there's definitely been times that I would say when we've had to find our way back to that process. Recruitment and unmet needs. So this is my way into thinking about having a clear sense of who is the right fit for that specific group and what it means for that group for people to be a peer. So this is thinking about not just what are the needs of the individuals, but what are the needs of the group, and how are those two things balanced against each other? What are the unmet needs of the group, and what are the unmet needs of the people in it and of the people that are going to be joining it? And it's super important, to be honest, because I can think of loads of people who would benefit from joining the group. Are they the right fit? Would it be the right thing for them? It's about respecting the individuals and the group equally. And the thing that I keep coming back to is this sense of a USP. So what is unique and specific about this particular group, and what are the boundaries around that? So as I mentioned before, we have our focus is really broad. It's not tied to organizational objectives. Everything is allowed within it. And that's one of the things, that's one of the secrets that I found in terms of everyone making that continued commitment to the group. It really, and I guess that links to that thing of unmet needs. That focus that's specific to the group is one of those unmet needs for us. And there is a unique process, as I mentioned. For us, that includes the longer check-in process and the social time, and then the membership. So for our group, we have made a clear decision at certain points that it is a group for women and non-binary people, and that is specific to us and our set. That's not a recommendation generally, but it's about the USP of our set. And also generational difference is one of the things we've decided we have to have within the set, as well as a generally shared level of experience in terms of work. So we've all been senior managers at some point in our various different fields, although we have very different work backgrounds now, which is also part of the thing that keeps it alive. We also have to be realistic and we have to be flexible. And this is, it's really an ongoing negotiation for us, because if you are going to commit to something over that length of time, it has to work with people's lives. So for us, we've prioritized in-person meetings from 10 till 4 because we're geographically dispersed. We thrive from that sense of liveness and being in each other's presence. And it's better to commit to 5 hours that we can all make rather than having longer days and dropouts. And this flexibility means we also can do blended working sometimes, which we were all online during COVID. And then we can have some people joining via screens if it was really a kind of last backup option because of the importance of that liveness. And then finding the joy. So this is something that has been coming up more for me in every area of work, but also particularly in action learning. And again, it's about tapping into that thing that you get from that set and from that group of people that you don't get anywhere else. And that might be the individuals, it might be the place, the environment, but that coming back to that sense of joy rather than seeing it as another work thing that you have to do, that's one of the things that keeps all of us going back for more. Then beginner's mind, and what I meant by this is not thinking of yourself as an expert no matter how long you've been doing it. So keeping it fresh, not having a hierarchy, and wearing the history of your group lightly so that doesn't become a burden to you or anyone else in the group. And that freshness can come through in the contracting. So in some ways, there is an element of becoming a new set when a new member joins. For us, because those people might not have an experience of action learning, that includes having recontracting, it includes doing an origins, influences, and where we are now exercise. That might be familiar to some of you. And introducing everyone, like refamiliarizing ourselves with the important principles of action learning. And acceptance that people change and people leave, and that's absolutely fine. And then the last thing that I wanted to reflect on was this idea of traditions, not tools. So as a member of Chris Yates's group said, the level of commitment is incredibly high, like stepping into a tradition rather than picking up a tool until you've finished with it. It contains the richness and echoes of others who've gone, but are still there with their pool of styles, their wisdom. So this sense of tradition for me really sums up what's special about committing to action learning for the long term. And that learning continues. So for us, that's about bringing in the new. 2 of us are practicing action learning facilitators, and we make a commitment to bring in new ideas and techniques, but also new people. And this issue of difference and diversity, I think, it's a really important part of action learning, having different perspectives and experience. And our group is currently all white and broadly similar socioeconomic backgrounds. And I think there's an element of risk in that. That's something that we're looking at in terms of how the group develops in future. And recruitment and contracting, this is an ongoing learning thing for us. So as I mentioned, I've been learning from Chris Yates's work as well, and they have a what do they call it? A probation period. So 2 sessions where the new member will go to those 2 sessions before the set and that member choose each other. And I think that is a great part of the recruitment process that I'm going to look to bring into our set. And remembering that there is no end. So action learning is really, it's an ongoing process and there's no neat wrap up. And it's really that richness that makes it this practice for life. Okay, so that's the end of the presentation. and hopefully we have got some questions that you've been adding to the Q&A window. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and then we'll have an opportunity to look through some of those questions.
No questions at the moment, Mel.
That's okay, because I have some questions for you.
Oh, okay.
So, if you've got any questions, any reflections, anything that you want to ask us or share about your own experience, please feel free to drop those in the Q&A window as we're chatting. And I would like to know, Sonja, I know that you've been in a long-running set as well, so what do you love about it? What's particularly rewarding about that experience for you?
Particularly rewarding. Okay, that's a good question. I'm in the set that Chris Yates wrote about. So I'm not a founding member, but I have been in it for, let me think, 22 years. And if I kind of step right back, it's something about having that space in my life, you know, for both work, I won't call it supervision, but work reflection and personal reflection. I believe it keeps my action learning practice fresher and sharper as a result. And we're particularly good in the set at looking at our process. So I find that a really rich space, really, really rich space. Yeah, we did go online when we had to, but we prefer and prioritize face-to-face as well.
Yeah, totally. And I think particularly over time, for me, I can meet a group for 4 sessions a year over Zoom, but if it's going to be longer than that, there really is something about that being in person that adds an extra layer to that dynamic. I can see that we've got some questions coming in.
I've got some questions now. Ian started one. Basically, it's a set that's been going on for 18 months. How do you recruit, given that they already all work in different unrelated organisations? So how do they find someone else? I don't know if anything comes to you immediately there, Mel. It's not an easy one.
It's not. And actually, for us, it has been through personal recommendations. So we've never advertised because of this thing about a particular group dynamic and all agreeing on, it's almost a gut sense of who's going to work within that group. And I would say we've really honed that, because out of all the people that we've invited, 2 haven't worked. 1 didn't work out, and we learned a lot about that idea of who is a peer and what's going to be right for the group. And another one was a logistical thing. But other than that, we've talked a lot about who those people might be and then made personal invitations to them. But I think that also there's ups and downs to that, because like I said, this idea of difference and sameness, that can be a risk when you're kind of working in that way. It's worked for us, and that sense of personal invitation. But I don't know, how have you dealt with that, Sonja?
Interestingly, I joined my set in response to an advertisement. A recruitment advertisement on I can't even think now, but a learning and development or action learning platform somewhere, I can't even think. And I called all the members, all their numbers were there, and had a conversation and attended a meeting. Since then, we have both done some advertising and some, what I'd call it, networking versus, networking invitation type thing. We've done a bit of both. But for me, it's about clarity, really. Clarity of what you're communicating and who you're looking for and what you're wanting and what you're doing and the purpose, and then giving people the chance where we are the set that say, ideally we'd love you to join us for 2 meetings and let us know what you think of it.
Yes,
so
I'm definitely going to be trying that one, rather than I think we were doing more of a married at first sight approach, which I like the idea of the probation. Okay.
So at the other end, Natalie's asking about leave taking.
So leave taking, we actually have a written procedure, and we don't do it very often. So I'm going to try and remember how that works. But we ask that if people want to do a leave taking, they give a set's notice, so that they wouldn't arrive and then tell us that they're leaving that set, that it's their final set.
Yes.
Because then you end up that ends up becoming the focus of that day. And that's definitely happened before. So you give one set's notice, and then there is a process that we go through in the group where everyone writes a gift to that person that's leaving about what they've meant to the group, and they can choose to share all those, or they can just keep them for themselves. They can read them out, and they do a process of sharing what they've learned and what the group's meant to them. And it's this process of mutual exchange that is incredibly moving when it happens. And also it does, I mean, I don't know if closure is the right word, but it lands that leave taking really nicely. And like I said, when it doesn't happen, I've definitely seen the destabilizing effects of that. So is there anything else that you'd add to that, Sonja, that your group does?
I mean, I think our set learnt a lot from somebody leaving abruptly. But now we have very much the kind of process you describe, but we do it orally. We speak it in the room. But we also, to support the kind of leaving, if you like, we once a year recontract explicitly. And we have an exercise usually, January or February, whenever's the first meeting, to say, just to check in about what I'm getting from the set and what my intention is around how much I can attend or what would work for me. So we have lost a couple of people that way, but they've been able to say in January, well, actually, I'm looking to move house and I'm going to be a really, long way away, and I'll keep you updated. So when that came to pass, we knew we were losing that person. And we found that really helpful. But in terms of the actual leaving, we've done just what you say, both ways, and done it orally in the room.
Nice.
So what else have we got here? Marion's asking a question about self-facilitation. What do you do, Mel? Do you take it in turns, or what do you do?
This has really changed over time, interestingly. So to begin with, because we were all trained facilitators, it was completely shared among us. There are three trained facilitators in the group, and what's happened over time is that because two of us are currently practicing facilitators in other contexts, we do slightly more of the facilitation in terms that which tends to be more about the structure of the day, for example, holding people to the structure of the day, when it's actually facilitating the actual presentation itself. Then we try to take turns as much as possible, because we've gone through phases where it has just relied on the people that are trained, have been trained. And again, I think it leads to that sense of like the group becomes slightly less, I don't know, it goes back to the thing about power dynamics that I was saying. It feels important for everyone to have part of that, whereas the holding of the facilitating of the day feels more like administrative, I suppose. So
yes,
and that's a good thing if you're actually doing it as a job. That's a good thing to be able to practice. So yeah, that's how it works for us. But that's particularly because we have people coming into the set that have no prior experience of action learning, and it means that they can have a gentler start rather than being thrown in at the deep end.
Yeah, I get that. And Natalie's asking, what do we know about what helps new sets continue, when a set's just started, to continue to self-facilitate? She makes the point that some do and some don't. What would you say? I mean, I think that's a really interesting question. But what your thought? I'd be interested in your thoughts there.
There is definitely something about this need for experience, like that experiential sense of impact of what it actually does for people, in how, if it's had a transformational effect on people, they are definitely more likely to make that commitment, and that can take time. So I think I don't think I mentioned this earlier, but in terms of commitment, that's a big thing that I've definitely seen people need to experience. You can know it intellectually, but until you've had that real profound sense of what it can do in your life, then it's going to be harder to make that commitment. And for sets that are reliant on it linking to their organizational purpose, for example, I think that can be one thing where it can, that it can run out of gas. It can, if there's too much sameness, or if they've solved some sets actually are never meant to become self-facilitating because they're set up for a particular reason, and that's absolutely fine. If they're focused on a problem, for example, within an organization, they don't need to continue for it to be successful, and that's okay. What about you, Sonja?
Well, I'd really agree that once a set's had that, you called it personal transformation, or a lot of light bulb moments, or that kind of really powerful energy, the commitment and kind of intention to continue is way higher, way higher. And when you get that, ironically, the one thing you haven't mentioned, and we come across a lot, is the practical admin. So I quite often come across sets who I've worked with or done a training cohort with, and they're like, this has just been incredible. We really need to meet. And we'll talk about admin. And when I check in with them 3 or 4 months later, it fell by the wayside because somebody did an email, suggesting they meet in, I don't know, September, and somebody didn't get around to it, and it drifted. So ironically, I've seen sets fall out of not prioritizing the admin. And I say that really clearly. And I say it sometimes works at the beginning of a set to have an hour's meeting to sort your admin out. How often do we want to meet? Are there days of the week we can't meet? Are we doing it virtual, face-to-face, or mixing it? How are we going to hold? So then you've got that overall structure in place. So it's a funny kind of, given the work can be so transformative, it's a funny, ordinary, almost housekeeping thing that can trip them up, precisely because nobody's got the kind of lead for facilitation.
And
so that's quite one, really. I may say funny, but and easy to fix if you make it clear.
It is easy to fix, and sometimes if you're the admin person, if you're the project manager in your group, and that there's people in your group that are absolute chaos, you're just going to have to suck it up and be the admin person if you want to make it work. And that's not because they don't want to, it's because some people just are going to be better at that side of it than others.
Yeah, for sure. Now we've got to, I'm not sure how to read this person's name. Oops, it's just vanished. I think it was a Ference. Ference saying they've had 4 sessions with a facilitator and they're about to become self-facilitating. So in my experience, I don't know what you think, Mel, in my experience, unless you've got a really talented group of people that are really motivated, 4 sets isn't always enough to become successfully self-facilitating. I can't speak for this group of people because I don't know them. They may well have had other learning set experience or be calling on coaching experience and stuff. But if they were kind of completely new to this whole world, it's not my experience in general that 4 sessions is enough. And so I'd say hold tight to the structure of session it is, whatever structure you've got. I'd say hold tight and make it explicit. And there'd need to be a comms piece at the beginning of the new meetings for whoever the 2 new folk are. So you can need clarity about roles, about what you're doing and why, what each step means, and possibly a kind of sense check. Can we do it after 4? Maybe you can, and it'd be great if you can, and some sets do, but it's rarer.
Absolutely. I mean, I think 6 is normally a good kind of place to start from being self-facilitating. It can work from 4, but in terms of the structure of the sessions, I think it depends what's working for that group already. And if it is, if you have a process that is working, like I said, the structure for us is about keeping to that, the process that was established in really early days around having the arriving, doing the checking in round, bidding round, and then deciding who's taking kind of a few minutes to decide who's going to present that day, when the lunch break's going to be. And, that whole bit for us, that whole bit can take an hour in the morning because we've prioritized that checking in. So having an hour of the checking in, the bidding, and then the working out what the rest of the day is going to be like in terms of timing. And then it kind of runs itself from there with those with each of those rounds afterwards. So if there's any other kind of specific questions you had about structure, do drop them in. But it's really about not overloading it. Just less is more. Less is always more in terms of structure, I think.
So Claire is asking, every time I look at a question, it seems to vanish. Claire is asking, how do you find new members not known to you? She's got two questions here. And the second part of that is the sensitive way to establish their sustainability. Shall I start with the second bit, just because I think I've already spoken about it?
Yeah.
In my long-standing set, we ask people or invite people to attend 2 whole meetings so they get a proper look at who we are and a sense of our process and experience us. And then at the end of the second meeting, and we say this up front, we do a round. Would they and would we like to continue working? And it's a chance for the new person to say, actually, it's not for me. And they may say it's not for me because, or they may just say it's not for me. And it's a chance for all of us to say, yes, I think this will work. And then somebody's spent however many hours it is in our presence doing the work. So that's one of the things that helps us around sensitive ways of establishing sustainability. How do you find new members that you don't know? That's if you've not tried that, Mel, the kinds of things I've known people do is reach out to all their networks. So not necessarily, invitations to someone they know, but I'm in this collective or this group or this professional membership or this LinkedIn group or whatever it might be. Those are the best kinds of things I've known. I don't know if you've come across anything else there. If you're looking for fresh people you don't know.
Yeah, I think that having it at one remove is a really great place to start. But also, I think it goes back to that thing I was saying about understanding what the USP is of your set. So rather than putting out there, does anyone want to join an action learning set? This is what the action learning set is. Really being specific about the type of person or background that you're looking for. What does a peer mean in the context of your set? Being clearer about those things are going to help people self-select. You're going to find the right people quicker, because it's so broad in terms of the range of people that might be interested. That's kind of the thing that I was saying is it would be great if all of those people were in an action learning set. Is it the right action learning set? What are your unmet needs at the moment? And what might the unmet needs of that other person be?
Yeah.
Okay, I think we've got time for a couple more.
Yeah, Chris has asked a question, which I think is a good one in a long-term set. And I'd be interested to see your thought, Mel. How do you maintain enthusiasm for the process review when you're really well-established set? So you're not learning the process in your set. You all are very familiar with it. So how do you keep that dynamic or energetic or whatever Chris is asking?
I would say we haven't always got this bit right.
Okay.
And it's something that does fall off the agenda when when you feel like the wheels are running smoothly, we don't need to review the process. Actually, that's a red flag for going. If you feel that comfortable, that's probably the time to review the process. The enthusiasm for it, I think, again, this is going to be a different personal motivation for everyone. For me, it's as much about taking that learning into the rest of my life and my practice as it is about the process for that group. So I think I don't know if anyone's familiar with this idea of radical candor. There's a lot of talk about improving the process of feedback at the moment, generally in our lives and work, particularly environments, but also in relationships. And for me, process review is a way of getting comfortable with that thing of feedback, with that idea of, whether it's radical candor or whatever way you want to look at it, it's a rehearsal of the feedback process itself in the rest of life, as well as how it relates specifically to that set.
I think that's lovely, actually. I think it's a safe place to do it in a long-standing set, because you will have done it before. And in my set, I think you said this at the beginning, Mel, we just happen to be people who find that really rich and rewarding space. And it's quite unique. You don't get it in a lot of places. You don't even get it in a lot of learning and development organization development spaces, never mind other spaces. So we have always had sky-high enthusiasm for that. It's always been part of what's kept us going. And it may well be like you're saying, Mel, we care about that in the rest of our lives, as well as some of us care about it for developing that professionally. So I don't know that there's a simple answer for that question, I'm afraid, Chris. Josephine's asking, she's struck by the variance in sets and how action learning is delivered. And how do you agree on the model, or does it matter? So I don't know. Shall I let you want to start with that one?
Okay. In terms of the variance and how it's delivered, in my experience, the tenets at the core of it are the same, and the variations are the degree to which one of the main variations, I suppose, is the degree to which a facilitator intervenes in that process. In the UK, I have mainly seen a broadly similar model being used, and I guess it's the same as thinking, do different coaching models matter? Do different facilitation techniques matter? It's about using the right thing for that particular group of people. For me, this is the thing that I was saying about process. If I find that the particular model that we use, which is the one I learned through ALA, and it's this very simple, what's often referred to as classic action learning, it comes down to this less is more idea, but also that if we mess around with that structure at all, it does tend to slightly unravel. This is just in my experience. And again, I've seen that in other sets where people play a little bit fast and loose with the basic underlying principles of action learning. And then there's much more room for, I guess it just doesn't hold the people in the same way as when you stick to those principles, is my kind of basic take on it. What about you, Sonja?
Yeah, I mean, I completely endorse it. I don't think it matters, but what matters is that group is all committed to it.
Yeah.
You know, if you've got 5 people want to work in one way and someone else does in another, you potentially got tension or disruption. So for me, it's about all agreeing how we're working. Yeah, that's the most important thing for me. Have we got time for a couple of quickies?
Yes, I think because Carol's put a couple of questions up, we could answer one of those. Yeah, and I just wanted to say that's the really important thing, because as long as you're all committed to the same thing, then when there are people stepping outside those boundaries, it's the commitment to that framework that helps you to manage those oversteps, basically.
Yeah.
So
Carol's asked about venues.
Yes. And yeah, cost, again, I mean, I didn't mention this, but it's a really important thing to acknowledge. Cost, economics, again, if you're going to commit to something long term, and particularly when there's a group of freelancers, for example, keeping the costs down has been super important to us. So that's why we meet in people's houses. We are lucky enough also to have people working in organizations where they can sometimes gift a room, and that's really helpful. There is definitely, if we're meeting in people's houses or in relaxed venues, though, there is definitely another layer that needs to be there of that thing that I was saying about coziness. That's definitely a risk factor. But I mean, venues can be as varied as the people in the group. You know, we sometimes meet outdoors, which is amazing if the weather's right, if you can find a quiet kind of private outdoor environment that works. And comfort is a balance again between comfort and not being too comfortable. I think the principles of what works for a space are more important than the actual type of a space. And that's a nice segue, because we are going to be looking at our next webinar in the autumn is going to be looking at inclusive spaces and how we create spaces that are more inclusive for a wider range of people.
Okay. And what's Carol's asking anything about our development? What would you say about your own development?
Oh, years 2, 5, 10, and 15. I don't know if that's another webinar. That's a whole other webinar. But I would say there was an interesting fluctuation for me personally in terms of I also had developed as a coach alongside my action learning practice, and my development has really been about leaning into discomfort. So the thing that I've noticed most in my development, and the thing that I have particularly in the last couple of years, over that whole time, is the degree to which I have been more able to sit with difficult experiences, to hold space for conflict, to hold space for a really wide range of really difficult experiences, emotions, stories, all of that sort of thing. That's definitely a development trajectory. And also my relationship with the action learning structure and process, beginning by really tightly holding onto rules, but holding onto them tightly in a way that maybe suffocated them a bit, and then trying to find that balance between holding them with care, but in a way that gives them space to breathe.
And frequency of, to just say quickly, Judy, that is such a big question around setting up sets in organisations. I don't think we could remotely do it justice, even if we had the whole webinar on it.
But that's definitely,
but we've got something here.
Yeah, sorry, no, I just wanted to say, in terms of experience setting up action learning sets in organisations, that's something that we have got resources and information on elsewhere. So any specific questions that have specific resources that are linked to them, we might be able to find a way of sharing that with you. Like I said, we are going to be doing a follow-up email.
And the last one, what's your experience of the most effective frequency for balancing commitment and sustainability? For me, for a self-managed set, I'd say what works for the community for us. I don't know what you'd say.
Yeah, and that really depends. For us, we're geographically dispersed, and 4 is the amount of sets that we can manage a year in terms of travel. For me, it involves an overnight stay each time. There's childcare, there's, that's the level of kind of commitment that we make to the set. So it's a big deal, but 4 times a year we can do that. And I think 4 to 6 is ideal. Any less than 4, and I think when we've had any less than 4, which has been just for like a logistical reason once, that gap, that length of time, it really, there's so much to catch up on the next time as much as anything else. And that rhythm is a really important part of it. So yeah, again, it's totally specific to that group, but between 4 and 6 is what's worked most in my experience.
So I'll hand over to you to let you wind this up then, Mel. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sonja. So yeah, thank you everyone so much for joining us today. And I loved answering those questions. It's really fascinating. We have a final poll for anyone who is able to complete that. I'd love it if Becky could share that with you. We've got a couple of polls so we can get more insight into what you would like from us in future. We will be putting this webinar up on YouTube and sharing the link with you. And there will be a follow-up email with the link in the next few days. And as I was saying, we are going to be doing our next webinar in the autumn on inclusive spaces, with a particular focus on neurodiversity in action learning, but generally principles for creating more inclusive spaces and accessible spaces in the future. So thanks again for joining us, and I hope to see you again in the autumn.